trying to understand the impact of humans on Earth is something that's very much a high growth area within geography. So departments across the country are growing, not only because of GIS, computer mapping, all that stuff I talked about beforehand, but also the growth of human impact on the environment research. So just trying to understand anthropogenic causes or impacts to the environment. So anthropogenic is just a fancy word for saying human caused, human induced, human created change. So in terms of our environment, there's no doubt that humans, throughout entire human history, we've been changing, we've been altering the world, we've been altering the earth. So it's, it's one of those deals where it's not just like all of a sudden something's changed. It's something that's always happened. But of course, with increasing population that we saw in the 20th century, with increasing globalization, economic wealth growing across the world, people having more money to spend on stuff, technology increasing and ramping up and essentially changing quite quickly, quicker than ever, all of these various factors together illustrate a greater change or an exponential change compared to the anthropogenic change that's occurred throughout our human history. And of course, very important to all of this is the role of resources. And so resources are just anything from the physical environment that has value to us human beings. It could be food, water, plants, soil, animals, minerals. But essentially the key here is resources are what produce energy that powers our homes, our cars, our workplaces, our industries that produce our goods, and on and on and on. Further, we can distinguish when we look at resources between renewable and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources are essentially those that you're never going to run out. Renewable, as the name implies, they're kind of, as we use them, they're replenished. So think of that as like, for example, solar energy, the sun. It's not going to stop shining. Wind energy. The wind's just not going to stop blowing in certain areas. We think about hydroelectric. Water, it's going to be around. It's always, we have the same amount of water we've had for a long, long time. And so all of those are things that are constantly being replenished. Non-renewable resources, with examples of fossil fuels, and I'll explain fossil fuels later on in this chapter, are those that as they're used, they're depleted. And so we think about, for example, oil or coal. Those are examples of non-renewable resources. Yeah, oil and coal, they're actually from animals and plants that over time have compacted, and this is talking thousands and thousands and hell, millions of years. But as far as our lifetime, the same amount of coal that we use is going to be produced and added back to the geology or the underground underlying bedrock. And so we think about coal and oil. Those are great examples of non-renewable resources. As we use them, they start to become depleted. In other words, there's a finite or a certain amount of them that we find on Earth. In terms of how we manage resources, there's two schools of thought. We see these for sure more in our high-developed, wealthier countries, and I'll explain a little bit more as far as why they're more interested in preservation and conservation. But we see preservation and conservation often confuse words, but let's try to understand the key differences between these two different approaches to managing our resources. First off, preservation. That's going to be the maintenance of resources so that they stay in their present condition. This involves minimal to no impact by humans at all. Preservationists will say, man, nature, it's not a commodity. It's not here for your pleasure. It's not here for you to take and use and get pleasure out of. And so preservationists would argue, let's leave everything as is in its current state. Whereas conservationists would say, well, let's be more sustainable, which is a buzzword of the 21st century. In other words, let's be smart about how we manage and use different resources. So you often hear conservation and sustainable development used hand in hand. With the idea, with conservationists would say, let's not just, completely just change our lifestyles. Let's not hold back our advancements as a civilization for the sake of preserving certain natural resources. But with that being said, with that in mind, let's lessen. Let's maybe think about lowering the amount of resource usage so that future generations can enjoy this, so that our kids' kids can still enjoy these same resources and see value out of them. So when we use an example, if we cut trees for a paper mill, for a paper factory, but if you do so in a way in which the forest still relatively remains intact, that would be conservation. Preservationists would say, nope, you don't touch that forest, you leave it alone. So like I said, this is something that's more of a first world problem, more of a stage 4 country problem, in which they often have to consider. But this is something just to kind of different